So agency-only engagements. There's 4 examples here. The first 2 are regarding an individual as a worker.
Yeah.
And the second 2 is the agency engaging the individual as an employee. Okay, so we'll do the example first of the worker. So there's 2 examples here. John, do you want to just talk us through?
Okay, so the typical scenario is where the agency worker isn't engaged as an employee. So they are a worker. They may be on 0 hours contracts, or they may be on something whereby they've got effectively a temporary contract with the agency, but not sufficient to make them an employee of the agency. And again, come back to Chapter 7 legislation's been around now for a number of years, and that sets out who's liable to operate pay-as-you-earn if there is supervision, direction or control, or the right to supervision, direction or control. And as you can see from these 2 examples, first example is worker engaged directly via an agency to the end client. It's the agency that's responsible for assessing whether supervision, direction or control is in place, and if so, operating pay-as-you-earn and NIC. And then the second one is where you've got more than one agency. You've got a managed service provider, or you've got a tier 1, tier 2 type of agency scenario. It's exactly the same, but the entity that's liable under Chapter 7 is the managed service provider or the tier 1 agency. So again, just to reiterate, that legislation has been around for a number of years. This is not new, and it is not being affected by the joint and several liability legislation. Compare and contrast, however, where you've got an employment contract with the agency. And I have to confess that before we started delving into this, because of the new legislation, I probably would have said that they're fairly rare. Mostly the agency workers have got worker contracts rather than employment contracts. However, the first 2 large agencies I spoke to both said, yeah, we employ them and we've got employment contracts. So it is something which is still out there and is affected by the new legislation, the so-called Chapter 11 ITPA legislation. And basically, it's exactly the same scenario. You've either got an agency supplying the worker to the end client, or you've got a series of agencies, the end one supplying the worker to the end client. And it sets out who's responsible for operating PAYE and who's liable under the legislation.
So if you look at the first one, where the agency has the individual engaged as an employee, dealing with the end client is joint and severally liable.
Yeah.
Now, going back to other discussions we've had, end clients are just starting to wake up to that. Is that correct?
I think that's absolutely it. And actually, before this draft legislation came out, if an end client had asked me, do I have an issue with the agency employing the worker and operating pay-as-you-earn and NIC, I would have probably told them, no, that's probably the best model you want to be under.
Just based on conversations we've had, would it be fair to say that the end client has started to and will direct an agency to say, for goodness sake, we do not want any of this. Please do not engage our workers, inverted commas, as employees, because that's going to cause us some trouble, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's too early for me to say that I'm seeing it happen at the moment, but the obvious direction of travel, if I can put it that way, is that an end client can go, so hang on a minute, if you put your workers now on worker contracts rather than employment contracts, I'm no longer liable if you don't operate pay-as-you-earn and NIC, which strikes me as contradictory to the Employment Rights Bill and the direction of travel to make sure that agency workers have full rights. So it's a quandary, and it's again yet 2 bits of legislation which are banging up against each other.
But I think what it says to me is that end clients will be wanting agencies to be placing workers, whether it's because of this legislation or whether it's because of the Employment Rights Bill, more directly, which is great for advance, into umbrellas.
Yes, because if the end client wants to remove itself from the risk, the obvious one therefore is to say, yeah, by all means employ them, but employ them by a third party umbrella, and make sure you do your due diligence properly to pick the right umbrella, because if they're operating pay-as-you-earn and NIC properly, there is no issue, and if they're not, it's the agency's issue, it's not the end client's issue.
Yeah. And just to wrap this bit up, the last example is where we have an MSP between the end client and the agency, and again the MSP is joint and severally liable with the agency.
Yeah, And that's probably the scenario where you've got the end client is a large corporate. They'll probably want a managed service provider operating the admin around all of their outsourced workers. And absolutely, whether the managed service provider has yet become fully aware that they're liable for failure by any agencies further down the chain or not, I'm not sure. But you can see that's obviously a bit of a push and pull for the managed service provider. So again, the managed service provider might be suggesting to its agencies below it that it needs to not employ the workers, but it needs to have them employed by an umbrella.